Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Mourners cry as they watch the Queen's funeral procession at St. Giles Cathedral. The Queen is respected even during the war in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky signed the condolence register. Staying with Ukraine, the military is said to be taking or retaking more territory from Russian forces in Kharkiv. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Begin with our continued coverage of events and activities leading up to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. A funeral procession of the Queen's coffin has gone through the Royal Mile, kicking off the funeral program for Queen Elizabeth II in the UK. And much earlier, we saw members of the royal family following behind the vehicle carrying the coffin, and mourners reacting to the procession.
I think it's all very emotional, the fact that he's out so close to his mum's death.
Well, he had a very firm handshake, hadn't he?
Yes, I mean, I think he looks somewhat shell-shocked, I think, still, doesn't he?
He did. Yeah. I felt sorry for him. He hasn't even gone into the house yet to Holyrood, and he came round and shook hands. And he said he hoped it never happened. One hopes it never happens.
I found it more emotional than I thought, because at the end of the day, he's just a grieving son. But he was, he basically said to us that he had been dreading the moment coming and he was trying to keep everything going. So, yeah, clearly has a sense of duty.
It was a surprise because we only came here to lay flowers and we weren't expecting to see like any of the royal family. Yeah, not at all. So yeah, absolutely amazing to see our new king.
It just brought me to tears, really. Yeah, it was really, really emotional. And yeah, I just feel so privileged.
Yeah, probably won't see it again.
Now, just a few minutes before the ceremony at the Royal Mile, the King and Queen Consort did take their time to speak with well-wishers at Holyrood. They did shake hands with almost all of them. A Queen will lie in rest at the St. Giles Cathedral and will be for 24 hours, with members of the public paying their respects.
Thank you so much for your kind thoughts, support, and most appreciated.
Hello, I'm nice to see you.
God bless you.
Much earlier today, the King had a busy morning. He and the Queen Consort, who both travelled to Westminster Hall, where both the House of Commons and the House of Lords met to express their condolences.
King Charles and his wife Camilla, the Queen Consort, left their Clarence House residence to travel to the British Parliament for the start of another day of traditional ceremonies. Once again, the crowds were outside, lining the streets of London as the King's motorcade drove past. He arrives at the Palace of Westminster shortly after, for his first visit to Parliament as monarch, to receive condolences on the death of the Queen. The King addresses the lawmakers and peers whom he described as the living and breathing instrument of our democracy, telling them he was resolved to faithfully follow the example set by his mother, Queen Elizabeth. He made the address in Westminster Hall, the oldest building on the parliamentary estate.
As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all. Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall. My lords and members of the House of Commons, we gather today in remembrance of the remarkable span of the Queen's dedicated service to her nations and peoples. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
The King then departed from Westminster Palace and headed for the Royal Air Force Knot Halt, where he boarded a plane to fly to Edinburgh for more ceremonial duties.
Our London correspondent Juliana Olainka is on the ground for us. Juliana, the day has been quite surreal, hasn't it? In fact, the past few days have been surreal, I think, even for the King himself. Another day of ceremonies today, and the likes that have not been seen in a very long time. How are people processing the activities already witnessed today as regards the King's duties with respect to his mother?
Good afternoon, Amarachi. I think surreal is a great term to describe it. It has been a whirlwind ever since the news broke on Thursday evening. It has been 4 days, but in terms of Operation London Bridge, which is the term for those pictures that we've just been seeing, it is actually day 3 because the Queen passed on. It wasn't late in the evening, but let's say late in the afternoon. They didn't count that as day 0. And today, I think all of the attention really has been on the Scottish capital, Edinburgh, which is pretty interesting politically, because, of course, just a couple of hours before the Queen's death was announced, you had politicians from opposite sides of the spectrum debating about the union of Scotland, which is why I think it makes the fact that the Queen died in Scotland even more poignant. As you said in that report there, the Queen travelled the Queen's body, the Queen's coffin travelled from Holyrood House, where it had been since yesterday, from Balmoral Castle to St Giles Cathedral. In fact, just couple of moments ago, 10 minutes ago now, the crowd were able to pay their condolences, their last respects to the Queen. It will be open for 24 hours before it starts its journey to the capital tomorrow. I think King Charles III has, of course, been incredibly busy. He's had an extraordinarily a busy day, and let's not forget, of course, he is the Queen's successor, but then of course he was also the Queen's son, and so I'm sure that he is grieving. He said today in Westminster Hall, where for the first time he spoke to members of the House of Lords as well as members of the House of Commons, he did say that he feels the weight of history on his shoulders, and it's in full display right now. We could call it pomp and pageantry. We could call it spectacular, but the Queen, 70 years on the throne. It was only a few weeks ago now we were celebrating that. She was the jewel that kept the union of the United Kingdom together, and I think that has been on full display today.
Yes, and I understand a vigil begins tonight, Juliana. The King, his siblings will be posting a vigil around the coffin at St. Giles Cathedral. How significant is this part of the pre-funeral activities?
I think it's very significant, but in terms of Operation London Bridge, I think this just happens to be by chance. The fact that the Queen's mother, also called Elizabeth, which is why the Queen is Elizabeth II, she was from a Scottish family, and much to the dismay of the elite in London, the Queen loved Scotland. Balmoral was her resting place, and that's where she took her last breath. So I think a lot of what we're seeing today is purely because of circumstance, because that is where the Queen passed on. Yes, there will be a vigil at St. Giles Cathedral again this evening. We have seen lots of activity at St. Giles's Cathedral today. The King Charles III did lead a procession of his family, which included Princess Royal, the Duke of York, and the Earl of Wessex, alongside their siblings. Currently, he is at the Scottish Parliament holding an audience with the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, as well as other Scottish ministers. But he will be back at St. Giles's Cathedral for this vigil, where we do expect to see other members of the royal family. We were shocked and surprised, and I think millions of people around the world were happy that finally the feuding brothers were able to repair their fractured relationship and come out to meet the crowds and have a look at some of the condolence messages. Will we be seeing them tonight? Possibly. And we do know that Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, alongside her husband, flew immediately after the service at Westminster Hall to St. Giles Cathedral. So perhaps she will also be in attendance at the funeral, or the vigil this evening. I know that, of course, there are a lot of people that are, not royalists, but I think if you are a purveyor and lover of history, as I know so many are, you've got to look at this spectacle with amazement, because we are seeing it played out. In fact, I think the Queen's coffin at the moment has one of the oldest remaining crown jewels laying on top of it. I think it dates back to 1506. It's been linked to King James, of the King James, one of the last strongest kings of Scotland. I believe this is a gift that the Scottish Parliament has given to the Queen. So we're seeing a lot of history being played out here. And again, even if you are not a royalist, you've got to look at what we're seeing with sheer amazement, and it will increase as the days go on in the run-up to her funeral on Monday.
Yeah, and will be talked about for years and years to come. And the arrangement tomorrow is for the Queen's coffin to be headed to London before heading to Buckingham Palace, where it will be lying in state for 4 days. People will have the opportunity to pay their last respects. What are the arrangements for this?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. So tomorrow we're expecting an RAF helicopter to take the Queen's coffin to Buckingham Palace. I believe she will be accompanied by her daughter, Princess Anne, or Princess Royal, as she is called. I don't think we will be seeing much pageantry tomorrow. This will all be in preparation, I believe, for Wednesday. So there will be a little bit of breathing space, because again, the King has not stopped. It has been full on. And if you think back, we weren't alive then, when the Queen ascended to the throne, she was still a very young lady. And the world's media were not in full glare That's not the case this time round. So I do think there will be a little bit of breathing space for the king and for the rest of the royal family. However, just as I was saying that, yes, I do remember that tomorrow, because of course King Charles is the king of the United Kingdom and 14 other realms. There will be a visit, I believe, to Northern Ireland. He will be going to Belfast, as he will have to go to all of the four corners. But yes, the Queen's coffin arrives in London tomorrow. From Wednesday, it will lie in state at Westminster Hall for 4 days. When the Queen Mother died a few years ago, I believe over 200,000 people lined the streets to pay their last respects. For the Queen, it could be over 1 million people. In terms of the cost and spend, because a lot of people are talking about that, and we did speak about this, didn't we, a couple of days ago, Amarachi?
Yes,
the fact that not everybody is mourning the Queen. And a lot of the cost in terms of the funeral and the arrangements and Operation London Bridge is to do with the security, and there are expectations that London will be full, and not full in the terms of busy, but full as in at capacity. So there is a lot of security service information going on. And then, of course, we are expecting heads of states from across the world, including Nigeria, we hope, will have a full delegation to attend Her Majesty's funeral.
Well, I don't know about having a full delegation. I mean, they've told the US president the invitation only extends to his wife and not a delegation from the US. But Juliana, thank you again. We'll be looking forward to the rest of the evening as well as tomorrow as we go full gear into funeral mode preparations. Thanks again. Prince Harry today paid a highly personal tribute to his grandmother, the Queen, saying how he cherished the time he spent with the 96-year-old and how he would honour his father as a new king. In a statement, Harry, who stepped down from royal duties with his wife Meghan in 2020, praised the Queen's service as head of state and monarch and also spoke emotionally of her role as a grandmother. Part of his statement reads, "Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all our first meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you to meeting you for the first time as my commander-in-chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you, and there's many other special moments in between. You are already sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over." After Harry and Meghan left their official royal roles, they became alienated from the family, including his father, now King Charles, and delivered withering criticism of Buckingham Palace and how they had been treated. Harry did acknowledge, though, his father as king, saying, "As it comes to first meetings, we now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III." 5 days since the Queen died, or 4, depends on how you're counting, mourners outside London's Buckingham Palace have been speaking of their admiration and loss for the British monarch.
We came down on Thursday so that we could be ready for the funeral. Yeah, and it's important because, well, everybody loved the Queen. Everybody, not just the country, but the world.
Gosh, I absolutely adored her. I thought she was wonderful. Oh God, I'm going. I thought she was wonderful, and I a bit like Boris Johnson said, you know, like a child. I just thought that she was sort of going to go on forever. Of course, she couldn't. I'm excited about King Charles here. Very, very excited about her.
I think she was a very, very lovely woman. I think she lived a very, very long life, and I think it's very, very sad, especially if she was here for so long. But I think that King Charles is going to be a good king, as by the end he was kind of ruling by her side.
Because she's well respected all over the world, and yeah, I just feel she's family, and that, you know, I have to say goodbye as close as I can get.
Right, we left at 2 o'clock this morning from Bridgewater, Somerset, to pay our respects, as I was living in Bermuda before with Princess Diana, and I promised my dad before he died that I would come and pay my respects, but we've come to pay our respects anyway, as we feel we need to, as she's been in our life longer than my parents and my grandparents, so she's been there every day of our life, so it just feels right to come and do it.
Coming up after the break. There'll be more tributes from around the world and the proclamation of King Charles III in the Bahamas. Welcome back to The World Today. And more British territories over the weekend proclaimed Charles III as their new head of state during formal ceremonies. The Bahamas was one of them during a formal ceremony at Parliament Square in the capital, Nassau.
On the steps of the Senate will be His Excellency, the Governor General, along with
the crown of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas now solely and rightfully comes to Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. Now, therefore, I, the most Honourable Sir Cornelius Smith, Governor General of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, along with the President and members of the Senate, the Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, and the members of the late Majesty's Privy Council in the realm of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, with one voice and consent, publish and proclaim that King Charles III, by the death of our sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II, is now formally proclaimed sovereign of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Given under my hand and the public seal of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas at Government House in the city of Nassau, this 11th day of September 2022, and the first year of His Majesty's reign. Signed, Governor General. God save the King.
God save the King. Hip, hip, hip. Hooray. Hip, hip, hip. Hooray. Hip, hip, hip. Hooray. The King.
And days after the U.S. President Joe Biden said he would be attending the Queen's funeral, a White House official says Buckingham Palace did not invite the American president to assemble a delegation to attend. Instead, the palace has extended a special invitation only to President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. The White House says the invitation was formally accepted by the president on Sunday and will be accompanied by the First Lady. In previous funerals, such as the one of former South African President Nelson Mandela, the president would have been invited, as well as a delegation of officials to the event. The Queen's funeral is scheduled for Monday next week at Westminster Abbey.
I don't know what the details are yet, but
Let's talk to our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria, who would have made the president's delegation had he been allowed to bring one?
Yes, the president's delegation would have consisted of former presidents. Obviously, there's great talks around whether or not former President Trump would have been invited, and it's believed that he would not have been included in the delegation. But we do know that former President Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama were very much a part of and very much loving of the monarch, and specifically Queen Elizabeth. So they would have likely been with him as well. Accordingly, we would have probably seen former President Bush. We would have seen anyone that was a part of a previous administration within the U.S.'s presidential reigns that would have likely been accompanying him. And if there were any others that were obviously have visited the Queen in the past and had been a part of any of the monarch's specific interactions with the U.S., we would have probably likely also have seen potentially the Vice President and the First Gentleman to have joined as well.
It's been centuries since America became independent of the UK, but Americans are still enamored by the monarchy. Many of them admired the Queen, when she was alive, even though they never would have wanted a monarchy to rule over the US. So what was the true feeling many Americans had hearing about the Queen's passing and, the transition to a new King of England, or the King of the UK, beg your pardon?
Well, the U.S., as you said, has been quite some time, predates most Americans, remembering, obviously, it's a part of the history of the U.S. That many people relate to. But again, I think that the monarch, and especially if you've heard many of the reports surrounding Queen Elizabeth, has brought relevance and has brought a sense of cultural norms to the monarch, and specifically the U.S. has kind of, as you said, admired that. Recently, pop culture and American kind of contemporary culture has been very much enamored by the children. We know that Princess Diana was a major, major impact on humanitarian rights, which is a huge push in the U.S. Humanitarian issues in which she did overseas across the globe was definitely admired by the U.S., and she was one that was admired by many Americans, especially those who are of that older generation. Look to her, and obviously that means her children have been watched and have been admired by many millennials in the U.S., and all of the weddings have been aired in the U.S. Many have even had parties around the celebrations with the monarch. So the U.S. has had this, as you said, this kind of fascination and this love for the monarch, despite not ever wanting to have that sort of ruling and really following, obviously, our democratic practices and ways with our president. But this is definitely, I think, a time where the U.S. is reflective. They are providing their condolences and their respect to the family during this time, and remembering what Queen Elizabeth meant for the entire world.
And this weekend, many had to show their feelings, about the British monarchy and the passing of the Queen over the memorial for victims of the 9/11 attacks. Many people probably didn't remember that, but this Sunday was another anniversary, the 21st, in which nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives. President Biden reminded Americans of the united front that they put up when the attack happened years ago. Has it gotten any easier with the years gone by?
Well, when you mentioned 21 years ago, many Americans don't remember 9/11. They were so young. But for those of us that do remember that day, I think that being able to, as you mentioned, kind of shelving the emotions, I don't know if people were able to really shelve that, because you will always remember the World Trade Center attacks. You will always remember what happened with the Pentagon. There were obviously many ceremonies and many memorial services across the country at various airports, at the White House, and very other locations here in Washington. But again, that is going to be forever remembered. We also know that Al-Qaeda continues to be a threat to the U.S., and I think that keeps it very relevant in the minds of Americans as we continue to ensure the safety and security of America, but also the rest of the world as it relates to potential threats by Al-Qaeda. So this is continuing to be a time of remembrance for America. We see that there are individuals who are doing things like, traveling across the country, traveling from various cities, using just the carts that you use on an on an airlines to kind of show their respect and remembrance of the day and their sadness for the loss, as you mentioned, the 3,000 lives. And so there have been various acts that just to remember that day. But I can imagine that as time goes on, it will be still a memorial and a remembrance time, but the type of impact that it had 21 years ago will at some point dissipate.
Yeah, one of the impacts, of course, people who died as a result of what happened that day, the gases that were inhaled, some of them who were in hospital eventually had to, left loved ones behind. Maria, thank you again for joining us on the program. Love and tribute still pouring in from all over the world for the UK's Queen Elizabeth II, who died on Thursday at the age of 96. One of them, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, arriving early today to the residence of the UK ambassador to Ukraine to pay tribute to the Queen. He, as well as members of his staff, signed a condolence book. The president left a note in the book of mourning and laid flowers in the territory of the residence. President Zelensky expresses sincere condolences on behalf of the Ukrainian people to the UK. He wrote in the condolence register, "On behalf of the people of Ukraine and myself, I express sincere condolences over the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II." Excuse me. Ukrainian women and men share this great loss. We mourn with the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth of Nations, and all subjects of the British Crown. The memory of Her Majesty and her selfless service to her people will forever remain in the history of mankind. However, Russian missiles killed one civilian today and wounded 4 more in Kharkiv, according to Governor Oleh Syniobov. According to videos we're getting, a dead body under the blankets and another being carried away by paramedics could be seen. The chief of the investigative department of Kharkiv police said the strike hit a local police department, causing fire on the last floor of the building. Emergency services were on the site putting out the blaze. Russian strikes have again cut off power and water supplies to Kharkiv, according to the mayor of the second largest city of Ukraine. Earlier, the regional governor said 80% of power in the city had been restored following Russian shelling on Sunday, which followed a large Ukrainian counteroffensive to recapture territory in the Kharkiv region. Meanwhile, the Russian-installed official in Ukraine region said the Ukrainian forces outnumbered Russian and pro-Russian forces by 8 times during a lightning Ukrainian counteroffensive in the region last week. Speaking to the state-owned Rossiya 24 television, Vitaly Ganshiev said the Ukrainian forces had captured previously Russian-held settlements in the region's north, breaking through to the border with Russia, and that about 5,000 civilians were evacuated to Russia. He also said the situation is becoming more difficult by the hour and that the border with Russia's Belgorod region is now closed. Well, independent media cannot verify some of those reports, but over the weekend, Ukrainian forces overran the key Russian supply hubs of Izium and Kupiansk, where the Kharkiv region's Russian-appointed administration had been based. On Sunday, Russia's defense ministry published a map showing that Russian forces had almost entirely abandoned the Kharkiv region. Well, talking about retaking territories, Ukrainian forces have retaken about 500 square kilometers of territory in the south of the country in the past 2 weeks as part of a counteroffensive against Russian troops. That's coming from a spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Military Command, who was addressing this today. Natalia Humenyuk told a news briefing via video link, "On various sections, we have advanced by between 4 and several tens of kilometers. We have liberated areas totaling around 500 square kilometers." She said those regions had been recaptured by Ukraine. Ukraine's defense ministry says Russian forces were conducting airstrikes on Ukrainian forces in Kharkiv. A statement came after a Russian-installed official in Kharkiv said that Ukrainian forces had outnumbered Russian and pro-Russian forces by 8 times during a lightning counteroffensive over the weekend. Ukrainian forces overran the Russian supply hubs of Izium and Kupiansk over the weekend, Russia's worst military defeat since its forces were forced back from Kyiv shortly after President Vladimir Putin ordered troops into Ukraine. Speaking to the state-owned television, he said the Ukrainian forces captured previously Russian-held settlements in the region, breaking through the border with Russia, and about 5,000 civilians had been evacuated. The acting United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says Russia is intimidating opponents of the war in Ukraine. She also said Moscow is violating the right to access information by pressuring journalists, blocking the internet, and through other forms of censorship. Nada al-Nashiv said in a speech at the opening of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Russia's diplomatic mission in Geneva did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Moscow has created stronger laws this year to punish those deemed to discredit the armed forces, spread fake information, or call for unsanctioned public attention. Non-governmental organizations are calling for states to adopt a resolution at the Council's month-long meeting to create an independent expert to investigate alleged human rights violations in Russia. Last week, a Russian court stripped Novaya Gazeta, one of Russia's few remaining independent news outlets, of its license.
In the Russian Federation, the intimidation, restrictive measures, and sanctions against people voicing opposition to the war in Ukraine undermine the exercise of constitutionally guaranteed fundamental freedoms, including the rights to free assembly, expression, and association. Pressure against journalists, blocking of internet resources, and other forms of censorship are incompatible with media pluralism and violate the right to access of information. We urge the Russian Federation to reconsider measures taken to expand the foreign agent label to include individuals considered to be under foreign influence, and to criminalize undeclared contacts with representatives of states, foreign or international organizations deemed to be directed against the security of the Russian Federation.
We'll be speaking to the VOA's Anna Chernikova when we come back after the break. Plus, let's remember the Queen was one of the most popular, I say one of the most popular icon in the world. She did meet nearly every celebrity in her lifetime. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's bring in the VOA's Anna Chernikova for updates on the situation in Ukraine. Anna, great to see you. Hope you had a great weekend. Now, how can we believe the Ukrainian forces are really taking ground from the Russian forces in the northern part of Ukraine, Kharkiv specifically, because there's so much propaganda on both sides?
Good evening. Well, it was very unexpected, rapid advance of the Ukrainian forces because if we are talking about Ukrainian official sources, and of course there is, a lot of information from different kind of resources, but we always stick to the official reports, and official reports by the General Staff of Ukraine was very silent about the Kharkiv region, as well as President Zelensky himself. So we were hearing about counteroffensive actions in the Kherson region, but nothing about Kharkiv region. And of course, for Ukrainians, it was, well, definitely a very positive surprise, but everyone is very, impressed and surprised with such a rapid advance. For the moment, we know, and again, this is something that we can compare with international reports. I'm talking about Institute for the Study of War, as well as British intelligence, and also Ukrainian official reports. We know that 99% of the Kharkiv region is now liberated by the Ukrainian forces and is now under Ukrainian control. Also, most of the Kharkiv region border line with Russia, so the border of Ukraine and Russia in the Kharkiv region is almost completely also under Ukrainian control. I mean, we have reports, and I have a map just in front of me that it's just so almost the whole border line is already confirmed to be under Ukrainian control, except of some little part. But again, we are waiting for the confirmation by the end of this day or in the next couple of days. But I think it will be faster. So if we talk about reliable information, all this is actually officially confirmed, and U.S. military officials commented on that, saying that they're quite impressed with what Ukrainian forces managed to do. Also, we already can now independently confirm certain information by talking to people on the occupied territories. For instance, I personally had conversations with people in Izum, and they confirmed that since Saturday evening, actually, Ukrainian forces are already around and are already in Izum. So today we're receiving a lot of footages from the military itself and from the locals showing Ukrainian forces in the city and Ukrainian flags around and at the administrative buildings. And this is definitely something that Ukrainians were dreaming about, and the whole world was, looking and keeping an eye on. But of course, everyone is very much impressed with such a fast and rapid advance. And if we talk about Izum itself, because Izum is one of the most important cities in that area, it's very strategic in terms of its location, and it was one of the main bases of Russian forces in there. We know that for the moment, local officials reported about at least 1,000 civilians who were killed during Russian occupation, but this is not confirmed information yet. We are waiting for final, numbers and, of course, international investigation. But unfortunately, we hear reports about a lot of victims on these territories, and we will be waiting for, more information on that.
Yeah, and indeed, the Russians have not denied the reports coming from Ukraine, with the Ukrainian officials declaring victory in some of the territories in Kharkiv. And we also saw President Volodymyr Zelensky signing the condolence register for the Queen earlier at the British residence. So people in Ukraine also paying their last respects to the Queen, and they feel some sense of affiliation with the UK at this time.
Definitely, Ukrainians have very warm, relations with British people and Great Britain itself, especially, and of course, especially very thankful for the support that both British government and the royal family itself has for the Ukrainian people in this war. And actually, Queen Elizabeth II was very very positive personality in Ukraine, and Ukrainians loved her a lot. And of course, her reign, it's a really historical moment. And in Ukraine, this event is definitely, presented and is definitely, living through as the end of a certain era. And of course, Ukrainians pay their condolences. A lot of flowers you can see next to the UK embassy in Kyiv. So this is something that Ukrainian people definitely support British people and people of the Commonwealth in this difficult time, and of course welcoming the new king and his new reign.
Anna, thanks a lot, and do stay safe in Kyiv.
Thank you.
Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has publicly congratulated President-elect William Ruto for the first time since he won the August 9 election. In a speech outlining his administration's key successes, the outgoing president, who had backed veteran politician Raila Odinga to succeed him, said he would attend Tuesday's swearing-in ceremony. Just last week, the Supreme Court dismissed several petitions that had challenged Mr. Ruto's win. Kenyatta urged his successor to serve all Kenyans, irrespective of their political persuasions, saying that the country had undergone a consequential transformation during his tenure. Among the achievements he highlighted were strengthening the country's devolution system and the admission of the Democratic Republic of Congo into the East African community. A team asked to oversee tomorrow's transition say preparations are now complete, with more than 20 heads of state invited to attend the ceremony. At least one person has been killed, dozens more injured in central South Africa in flooding caused by the bursting of a dam at a mine. Water swept away houses and cars in the town of Jagersfontein, southwest of the Free State capital, Bloemfontein. People have fled their homes with a sea of mud and water flowing in, even as the town's power supplies are cut off as mud engulfed a substation. Reports say some houses completely collapsed. In the meantime, rescue teams, including divers and helicopters, have gone to help. Belarus has built its first amino acid plant in cooperation with China. A Minsk high-tech full-cycle agriculture project includes the first amino acid manufacturing plant in Belarus. It was constructed in cooperation with China. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said its importance is no less than that of a nuclear power plant. The factory has more than 1,000 employees and exports to the global market already. Now, Iran says it's ready to continue cooperating with the UN's nuclear watchdog to save the 2015 nuclear pact, speaking after European powers expressed frustration with Tehran's intentions to salvage the agreement. The country's foreign ministry spokesperson, Nasser Kanani, urged the International Atomic Energy Agency not to yield to Israel's pressure over Tehran's nuclear activities. The IAEA Board of Governors meets on Monday, 3 months after adopting a resolution urging Iran to give credible answers to the agency's investigations into uranium traces at 3 sites in Iran. Iran says the probes are politically motivated. On Saturday, France, Britain and Germany said they had serious doubts about Iran's intentions to revive a deal curbing its nuclear program in return for lifting of sanctions, comments that were rejected by Tehran and called very untimely by Moscow. We talked about the weather earlier, but the National Weather Service on Sunday issued a flash flood warning for parts of northeastern Illinois in the United States, including Chicago's northern metro area, after heavy rains flooded viaducts, stranded cars, and sent water surging into basements. Just looking at the aftermath there, Chicagoans shared pictures and videos on social media of cars partially submerged beneath underpasses and plumes of water shooting up from sidewalks. Even after the heaviest rain, it ended around 11 in the morning. The Weather Service warned the roads would remain flooded until the water had time to recede. The city on Twitter urged residents to avoid driving through standing water on streets, viaducts and low-lying areas. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts more extreme flooding for the Midwest. Extreme rainfall events, very local, very intense and very hard to predict, have increased in recent years, according to Chicago's Water Management Office. And as we're ending the program, Queen Elizabeth II met some of the world's biggest stars throughout her life after the monarch died at the age of 96 at Balmoral Castle on Thursday. Tributes did pour in from A-list stars and political leaders, showing the magnitude of her 70-year reign from every corner of the globe. The star-studded remembrances reflect Queen Elizabeth's time on the throne, where she met everyone, from world leaders to iconic actors to famed athletes and modern-day pop stars. From Marilyn Monroe to Lady Gaga, some of the biggest stars of the past 7 decades have had the honour of meeting the monarch. News of Queen Elizabeth II's death was announced on Thursday evening after Buckingham Palace released a statement earlier in the day expressing concerns for her health.
Congratulations. Oh, that's very kind. Thank you very much indeed.
I hope you know really at a deep level what this meant to a lot of people. Yes, it has. Congratulations. Did you enjoy it? Did you have fun at all? Or was it all work?
Not easy to play outdoors, actually.
Oh, but you know, it's so much fun.
My fellow
Yeah, he's a good boy. He'll go far. He'll go far.
Must have been an honor meeting the Queen. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Stick with us. We have updates on the funeral rites for Queen Elizabeth II right here on Channels Television.